I am going to go ahead. I'll have some more announcements after the panel. I want to let you guys know, go ahead and feel free to put your questions in the chat. My team will be feeding our panelists and our moderator your questions. We love how interactive everyone is out there, so we want to keep that going. So I'm going to introduce it to our moderator. I'm going to introduce our moderator, throw it over to her, and she will introduce the panel. I have Dr. Rebecca Wynn. She's the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist and CISO for Click Solutions Group. So Rebecca, welcome to the show, and I will let you take it from here.
Thank you, Kim. It's great being here with everybody here today. So we're here to talk about cybersecurity threats, what's going on in budgets, and all the other questions you might have to put into the chat. I want to make sure that everybody's assured that anything that we don't get a chance to speak to today, it's okay. I've asked that all those questions be captured, and then we'll go ahead and we'll wrap them up, getting back to you at a later point in time, whether it's in an article or if it's actually to you guys directly. Please feel free to do that. Again, I'm Dr. Rebecca Wynn. I have a podcast as well, Soulful CXO. It's actually coming out in a couple of weeks, so please check in on that. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's the best place to go ahead and get a hold of me. I specialize in helping startups to companies about $500 million strong and getting their cybersecurity strategy, trust evangelism, CISO work, vCISO work done. So if you need any of those needs, come out and see me. Happy to go ahead and help. Also do a lot with private equity, doing mergers, acquisitions, and doing assessments for them. Keith, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the team?
Thank you. So, hello, everybody. My name is Keith McMenamin. I'm the Vice President of Information Technology for Visit Philadelphia. We have a heavy emphasis on security. And Visit Philly, our name is our mission. We look to position the city of Philadelphia as a world-class travel destination. We were responsible for $16 billion worth of economic impact for the city in 2019. COVID hit us very hard, but now we're coming out of the woods and looking for 2023 to be our best year ever. So thank you, Doctor, and I look forward to interacting with everybody on this panel today.
Great. Jeff?
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Jeff Story. I am the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for the Bankers Bank. We're a correspondent bank, which means we're a bank for other banks, primarily community banks in the Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico region, where we have direct relationships and then have indirect relationships with many banks across the nation. Our purpose and goal is to help community banks remain relevant and serve those communities that they're in. Thank you for having me.
Great, and I love your background.
You got to have the money.
Rich?
Thanks, Rebecca. This is Rich Cocchiara here. I'm the Chief Innovation and Security Officer for Cognitient Corp. Cognitient is a company that specializes in helping other companies understand their risks, both business and IT. Everything from their cybersecurity risk to their marketing risk to their strategy risk to every kind of risk you can imagine. I've spent all of my career in the area of risk. Most of my time was spent in IBM, leading IBM's IT risk consulting team around the world, and then spent some time in New York City working with the New York City agencies, in particular, the New York City Department of Education, where I was a Chief Information Security Officer. So I have a varied background, and I'm looking forward to the conference. Thanks, Rebecca.
No, thank you. Sounds great. We're going to start out talking about nation states. It's been in the news quite a bit lately. There's been a lot of attacks that happened in 2021, 2022, 2020, and it keeps going trajectory higher and higher. How much, we'll start here with you, Keith, how much does, cities and municipalities, how much do they should be really concerned about that? And if it is a concern, what do you do to try and tackle that through business continuity, incident response, and disaster recovery planning?
Yeah, I mean, we better believe that the threat is real. We may not be the biggest city on earth, but we know that we could be a target. A cyber attack, nation state or otherwise, that if it hits an ordinary business, it can lead to financial loss. One of our biggest concerns is reputational damage and loss of sensitive data or disruption of operations. So these are things that we frequently discuss in an executive manner to our board. We don't want things to lead to compliance violations either. So there are no excuses today to not at least prepare and acknowledge the threat that exists.
What about you, Jeff?
It is a threat, and it certainly has to be on a register as an organization, but I don't know if it's a threat for every organization. I think you need to look at both components of a threat, the damage it can cause as well as the likelihood that it could occur. And for some organizations, it would certainly put them out of business, or at least put them in danger of continuing operations, but it may not be as likely. Your organization may have a higher risk threat if they're a warehouse with a bunch of paper, and where your employees smoke and the way the wind's blowing and light your warehouse on fire. That may be a bigger risk and may have an impact, but you also need to consider those large nation state attacks that certainly occur in the media and make great news, but may not be the number one threat for an organization. You have to consider them all, weigh them out, and see what the impact for you is. For a city, obviously, it would be larger. For a smaller organization, it may be smaller.
I have to agree. I have to agree, Jeff. Figuring out where your main threats come from is critical. I do know that, when I was a CISO for the New York City Department of Education, largest education system in the world. Obviously, big target on your back. Okay, so you have to balance it out and say, if you are an organization that's high profile, that if you are going to be targeted and attacked and it's going to cause major disruption, what's it going to mean to the nation states that are looking to potentially cause disruption and then potentially steal valuable information? I can tell you that, when I was CISO, we continually looked at different countries and where the threat vectors were. Where were the attacks coming from? Where were the attempted incursions coming from? And determine at that point what countries we may want to isolate because we figured that that's where they're coming from. But it's, again, just as you said, determining where your main threats are as opposed to all threats.
I'd like to add in one more point, too. I think a regular or an ordinary organization, for lack of a better term, could be a target if they're part of a supply chain. If the nation state maybe can't knock down the larger entity, but if they can blow out a weak link in the chain, that's a way a company could end up on the radar of a nation state, as part of a higher target.
I absolutely agree. That's where we see, especially with startups. Startups use a lot of SaaS models. And if you find Microsoft or Google or something along those lines, or above the line telco go down, then generally they're completely out of business. So how do you guys go about actually testing for that? Do you guys go ahead and test? What happens if you can't go ahead and get to your Microsoft Outlook? What happens if you can't use your Slack channel? Do you guys go ahead and have multiple streams that way that you can go ahead and test? How do you guys go about testing that and make sure that you have business resiliency?
I know from my perspective, when we were looking at that, we did have to come up with different ways. Obviously, education of the children has to continue. You can't stop it. So what are the backup alternatives that you might have, and how can we better isolate? It was continuous review and testing. All too often, a lot of organizations don't do enough third-party testing. And that was the biggest area that I found. I was more concerned with third-party software coming in and the actual code that we were creating and potentially introducing any potential risks. So constantly looking and evaluating what we're doing, evaluating what our vendors are doing, and then taking a look at and understanding how are we going to operate if we lose some of our critical capability, and ensure that kids can continue. So kids can continue to learn. So it was always something of a backup.
Yeah, and I'd like to continue with that thought that a lot of it is centered around incidents that happen. Sometimes our vendors are kind enough to provide natural incidents for us to talk about the way we need to respond, but most of what you need to do is work through the scenarios, whether through informal or formal tabletop exercises, and determine if you need to add additional controls. The two words that I like to use most in different conversations when trying to educate people: we need to worry about the threats, we need to worry about the controls to control those threats, to reduce their impact. If it's about communication, we need to decide, do we need more than one path for communication? What's our primary? What's our secondary? If it's a threat to our services we offer, do we need a second data center? Do we need a second SaaS service? What do we need to address those threats? But those should all be exposed through scenario review of different threats and different tabletop type exercises.
Yeah, not much I can add to that. I would just suggest, again, reinforce, make a point to take a look and know your weak spots, work through the scenarios. It's the best way to be prepared for an incident.
I know one of the things that I like to do is I like to take recent cases that have just been in the news, because a lot of times that's what's on the CISO, and it's mine CTO, or was mine, right, revenue officer, CEO. And what I do is I'll take like the first maybe 6 or 8 main points on what happened to make a system go offline. And then what I do is I contrast, could that have happened to us? If it didn't impact us, why didn't it impact us? What are we doing right? And if there is a gap, what's that gap? So then we can go ahead and address it. So that's one of the ways that you can go ahead and be that proactively. As we continue down this line, cyber liability insurance is also something that's really changed over the last 6 to 9 months. A lot of them are doing assessments of you. A lot of them are doing monthly assessments, looking at your outside servers coming in. How do you guys handle that? And are you guys part of the review boards of your cyber liability insurance to make sure you're properly covered?
Yeah, I've been involved in a number of those audits that come in. I mean, it's interesting when they come in, they audit everything. And it's not that they're only going to doing it once. Don't think, hey, I passed this audit, I'm done. It's continuous, and you've got to show that progression, that you are actually closing the gaps that you may have. Cyber insurance, as you said, is something that is becoming more and more common. And those organizations that can demonstrate they've got a proactive approach to managing cybersecurity, not just from a technology perspective, but also from a people and process perspective, all 3 aspects, I think are going to be able to demonstrate that they probably are entitled to a lower premium. And of course, it's always about money. So a lower premium, but also being able to actually get the insurance. Because if you are an organization that is not, as Jeff indicated earlier, I mean, that there are different things out there that you can look at and different standards that are available. If you're not following any of them, you're probably going to find yourself in a very difficult position with any cybersecurity insurance company.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, you're 100% correct. Cyber insurance is becoming more common. It's also becoming much more expensive. And that's getting the attention of our boards and our executive teams. So I think that helps my case when I have recommendations of a new technology or a new thing to bring in to help protect us. You know, they know that the money going into it is an investment. It's not a spend.
Yeah, and it's really, on your point, it's really helping us as security practitioners. It used to be cheaper to defer the risk to a insurance company, but now for the costs that I'm seeing, I can implement new controls that might limit that better. And as common as we're seeing more cyber insurance policies in the market, we're seeing fewer carriers. These insurance companies when they came into the market, I don't think they really understood what they were covering and what risk they had. And as they are losing money hand over fist, we're seeing a lot of cyber insurance companies exiting that market and just not renewing. And it makes me feel that you know, I have no crystal ball or anything else like that, that it's just getting harder and harder to get that cyber insurance, and the controls that they're requiring, while being good controls, are not not things that some companies are willing to put into place because they don't see the value in them. So it's going to be an interesting. Cyber insurance is an interesting market, but as everyone else said, premiums go up, coverage goes down, deductibles raise, and it's providing less and less value for the price that it is costing.
You know, one thing I caution people out there is you really need to read the terms and conditions and the exclusions. what is defined as a nation state, and can a nation state actually change? And will you be covered during that point in time? The other thing is about those assessments. Again, all they have to do is prove that you didn't do your due diligence at one point in time, and they'll negate your contract. With that, unfortunately, CISOs are still not covered as a whole under the D&O coverage, and we don't have any protection on those lines. Some of the bigger companies might have that built into their contracts. That's been worrisome to a lot of us CISOs, that we end up being the chief information scapegoat officer, status quo officers, but we obviously don't want to be personally liable. How have you guys seen that shift changing? I know for me, I try to get them to focus a lot more on enterprise risk management, instead of just talking specifically security, privacy, and compliance, but getting it more towards that framework and building us in a little bit of protections that way. What trends have you guys been seeing along those lines, and how have you been successful on trying to go ahead and make sure that you personally don't have 100% the risk on your personal head? Rich, you want to?
Okay, I'll go ahead and talk to that one. I think you hit the nail on the head there, Rebecca. It's spreading it out, and I don't mean that I'm looking to offload my responsibility whatsoever. I'm just trying to explain that it is more than just cybersecurity. It is looking at all aspects. Don't forget, you've got governance, you've got compliance, you've got all of the different normal IT processes that have to be followed. And I tell them, look, you have a choice. We can do this from a reactionary perspective, and then you're absolutely right. I mean, I've got a big target on my back then. But if I start to show people that, hey, look, I can address a lot of things, but I can't address them all on my own. There is a definite connection between myself and the business parts of the organization and the IT, the normal IT operations. It is not just, hey, the only one that's got to worry about cybersecurity and worry about, issues or incidents is the CISO. It's everybody. And an incident could be anything. And I always used to tell people, I said, the fastest way to shut down a company is to violate a compliance issue. I'm responsible for compliance, but if it's a business compliance issue, it doesn't matter. It's still going to get the company shut down, and I'm still going to have to talk about it as part of my risk register report, but somebody else has really got to address it. So it is everybody working together, and I think that's the key in every organization I've worked in or advised is, hey, this is definitely everybody working together, and if you're not, you're really putting yourself in a position as a CISO that you're going to take the hit.
Yeah, every move I make is trying to reinforce the fact that security is not a technology issue. It's not a security issue. This is a business issue. Everyone's involved. Everybody's responsible, because even though the CISO might be the scapegoat, there are other heads that could potentially roll if there's an incident or a breach. So putting it in that light, I think, really opens the eyes of the non-technical crowd, who can begin to realize that it's not just in this one department. It does touch everybody, and it affects everybody, and it could be in a very negative fashion. So that helps get them on board to kind of prepare and to be proactive instead of reactive in the event of security.
Yeah, and the way I approach my role in the organization, and I teach adjunct, and I make sure to share this with the students, is that I run my role as it's my job to allow the company to operate within an acceptable level of risk. And using that as my guiding principle, it's also my job to educate those people who can accept the risk, the board of directors, executive leadership, that need to make those decisions of what is acceptable or not. And it's my job to help execute that mission. Sure, we can shut everything down and be secure, but we're not going to be able to operate. And anything you do in business is going to have risk with it. So we have to educate. We have to reach out and communicate and not work within a bubble in accomplishing our role.
Hey, Rebecca, let me just say one more word on that, because it triggered something that I was thinking about, and that is that, a good example of what I mean by working and partnering with others is very often I get very close to the chief risk or chief legal counsel, because they're the ones who are going to tell me when I can destroy data. All too often, we're really good at backing up data, saying, hey, I got to put it in a safe, secure area. But one of the most critical things you can do as a CISO is to identify when you can destroy that data. Because destroyed data can't be hacked, it can't be copied, it can't be taken. So consequently, I'm always looking and trying to find out what is the minimum amount of time I have to keep that data so that I can destroy it. And that comes from your legal counsel. You don't decide that as a CISO. You got to find out what your industry standard is going to be.
No, I agree with you on all those great points. When we talk about risk, I get asked quite a bit is what's the best framework? And I'm like, framework that you're going to follow. For you guys, do you follow FAIR? What do you follow? I know for me, starting out with the CISO, which, when you talk about the enterprise risk management, that's part of the SOC 2, things along those lines, part of high trust as well. But you have to get people to start looking at what's that financial impact, what is the personnel impact, what's the technology impact, and things along those lines. What frameworks do you guys use, and how do you use them effectively in communication to the stakeholders and to the board? Jeff, you want to start that one?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about being in financial services is our examiners give us frameworks to use. We have to use within cybersecurity their cybersecurity assessment tool, which is loosely based on a lot of NIST standards, and most of our exam and compliance is centered around following those, and then we add our own appropriate controls as things dictate and are necessary.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, Rebecca, I mean, I'll just piggyback on what Jeff said. I start with NIST. I always do. And then I branch out from there to the ISO standards, and then take a look at any specific industry standards that might apply to companies that either I'm working for or working with. But you have to have a base to start with. I found that NIST is a good starting point because it's easily explainable.
Yeah, same here. NIST and ISO with the heavy emphasis on NIST.
I agree. I think the NIST cybersecurity framework is a great framework for any company, any size to use, because it allows you to have one common language to speak across the organizations, color-coded if you don't know that, breaks it down to more simpler domains, and you can use that in all your presentations and things along those lines. As we talk about trying to determine what is the risk appetite for the company, how do you guys do that? I hear that quite a bit. One of the things that we say as a CISO is our job is actually to maintain the risk level the company's willing to accept. But when I go into to do a lot of consultations with companies, I'm like, what is it? And I'm like, I'm not sure. You're supposed to tell me. So how do you guys think a new CISO should go about? I'm sure there's new CISOs out there. I'm trying to determine what is the acceptable risk of an organization. Because a company says that you're not going to be attacked at all, that's pretty naive.
I think it goes back to the point of security being, an organization-wide business issue instead of a security issue. Having an open line of communication with legal, with operations, maybe even finance or other departments that would directly impact, gaining their input, sharing your point of view, and looking at it from the 50,000 foot view, and then kind of drilling down into how it will affect the day-to-day operations is a good way to start.
How do you guys handle accountability in that type of model? What stakeholders do you think really should be part of that? And who should be accountable for which areas? Vulnerability management, for example, is that really the CISO's sole responsibility, or does it go also to technology? When you're looking at code reviews, is that 100% on the CISO, or should also be part of DevOps, for example?
I've always found that the responsibility is pretty broad, okay? You clearly don't want to make this just an IT discussion, because there's a lot of things that are not going to be able to be handled with IT. A lot of risks that you're going to find when you're putting together the risk register and understanding what the risk appetite is from a company is, it's going to be dictated most often by business. IT doesn't dictate the risk appetite, because business is going to say, look, this is what we can accept in order to conduct our business. Jeff opened with a very good statement when he said, hey, my job to enable you to do your business and within the framework of security. So, when I'm talking to the business side of things, I'm always telling them, look, I'll guide you, but really you're the ones that have to make this decision. I'm going to be able to then help put together that framework based on what you've told me, okay? Based on my knowledge of security, but also based on what you've told me your risk appetite is going to be.
And I agree. And the important word in a lot of that is enterprise risk framework. Your enterprise is your entire business. Cyber is one component of that. Cyber may or may not involve your supply chain. Cyber may or may not, it'll be a component in there. It may or may have a physical component, even though we generally think cyber is purely electronic. I mean, you can have physical issues that relate that way, but it's enterprise. So it has to involve all components of the business. And everyone needs to understand where the different threats are. And then you have to, as a organization, holistically address the threats, in my opinion, largest threat first and many times, and reduce those until you are at a manageable level, if you ever get there, because threats pop up every day. So it's not a one and done. It is a continuous improvement process.
I agree. It comes back to known, documented, being implemented, measured, and managed. One of the things I also go ahead and see is a lot of times we talk about strategic plan versus tactical plans. And a lot of smaller companies, middle-sized companies, worry so much about tactical time, they don't look and see what's their overall mission, so they can't really get to that risk appetite. So we move into how you communicate to the boards. How do you guys do that? Do you talk more from a strategic standpoint? Do you talk more from an operational standpoint? Do you talk more from a tactical standpoint? Or you do a little bit of three? A lot of times we only have a short period of time to actually try and talk to the board, if you get to talk to the board.
I think it's a mix of all three, but definitely technical is at the bottom of that list. I try to speak the language of the audience. I imagine every board is different. In my situation, I'm not fortunate enough to have many technology professionals on that board. So I try to use specific examples, visual aids, and especially examples of other people. I think that was mentioned earlier, of other organizations that have gotten hit and shown, how can we not be next? What can we do from that? And I think that really gets their attention, especially when you can put a dollar amount on it. I think that really opens their eyes and makes them aware about the security risks out there.
I agree. You have to know your audience. Every board's going to be a little bit different. In my case, my bank, our board is consistent of 100% bank leadership of our community banks that own us. Largely, these people come from loan officer backgrounds. They don't understand technology, but they understand risk. So I can approach them with risk-based scenarios with dollars attached to that allows them to understand where I'm going. And, if my audience was largely technical, I could get more detailed in that. But for the most part, they just want to know and feel certain and feel educated that they understand the risks that are there, and that they have addressed or are addressing the risks through the decisions they make, and trust that I'm doing my job, and if I'm not, they need to replace me.
And I'll agree with both what Jeff and Keith both said. My only recommendation on this, it's a quick one, is that when you do meet with the board, develop a dashboard for them that is easy for them to understand and consistent. Okay. I found that if I could keep my dashboard consistent so that they know what they're looking at, and they know how I've structured it, so that from quarter to quarter, I'm not having to re-educate them every time, that they get it. Okay. This area, you're going to talk about the business pieces. This, you're going to talk about the IT. These are the projects. These are the things. These are the overall risks that I've got to be concerned about. Therefore, when I go and present it the next month, they can either see things getting better or potentially new risks that I've introduced, but at least they're in a structure. The format of the dashboard is the same. So that's just a recommendation I give.
Yeah, one thing is I notice when I look at dashboards quite a bit, is sometimes boards, it's like I say they're garbage metrics. Mean time of resolution of service desk tickets is 72.5 hours. And then when I go in there to a consultant, I'm like, what kind of tickets? Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, is those password resets? What are they? Or they say, hey, our outer, firewall, had umpteen zillion, pings go by. And I'm like, what is those pings? Is that just a bot? It's a garbage metrics to me. It's not really looking at your true risk. Can each of you guys give maybe 3 or 5 examples on metrics that you think are really important that you include in that report, just so our audience can learn from that? Let's start with you, Rich.
Yeah, a couple of the metrics that I like to use, I mean, when I've sat down with the executives is, one, I'm going to tell them any potential incursions, and if they're seeing an uptick in potential incursions over the last quarter, so are we a target? Are we something, that somebody is targeting, and how many? I'm going to be looking also at the number of times that employees may have clicked inappropriately on certain things, because then it tells them if our education system and what they're doing, try to emphasize education, is working. Okay, so I'm looking at that. Then I'm looking at potential, downtime of different systems and trying to show them, look, we're getting better at reducing the overall downtime because we are, in fact, and that ties back to the projects. These are the projects that we're utilizing in order to reduce that overall downtime on those systems or on those applications or on those links or whatever it might be. So I'm trying to show them progression. I don't want to just show them, hey, look, these are just metrics. I'm trying to show them, and as you pointed out, Rebecca, if I'm showing them something like an incursion, I want to be able to show them, look, we've grouped them so we understand what's going on and where they're coming from, and that we are in fact improving upon them. So just a couple different metrics, but those are pretty simple ones. I'll go back to every dashboard, every report that I create is going to be customized to the board. As Jeff said, how do they ingest information? So I've got to put it in a way that they get it, and it's all customized. But once I get it, once I've got a structure to them, I try to keep it pretty consistent.
There's another one I'd like to add to that. One I like to show is the security awareness training metric of the staff. Every year I kick off with a full-fledged individual evaluation of each staff member. And then as I enter the quarterly board meetings, I like to bring up how the team has progressed over time, showing that the investment in their training is paying off, because then I follow that up with a security incident versus security spend report. I think those have direct correlation and, can give a quick visual of the effectiveness of, the security posture in the organization.
I have a whole lot to add to those answers, but for me, I report to the board in probably 3 different ways. One, at a board-defined employee committee within our IT steering, it gets a lot of detail in that information, in that group. But as we move up, the audit risk management committee would be more boiled down, where we might be focused more on intrusion stats or attempted intrusion stats or MDR statistics, employee security awareness training and things like that. But as I get to my big board, which is monthly, it really gets minimal once I get to that point. The information flows up and is available for those people.
One of the things with the board too, I always call it the return on efficiency and the return on investment versus just return on investment. I think ROI just by itself doesn't say a whole lot. You can go ahead and you can have a contract or a compliance, say you have to have a firewall. And so you buy the firewall, you get the contract, or you go ahead and you get your compliance report, but you never instantiate it well. So you don't have the return on the efficiency and the return on the investment. How do you guys go about defending your spend operationally and tactically, like situations along those lines? Because we're always trying to get extra budget, but if you're not being a good fiduciary with your budget as it is now, because you're not using your tools to the best of their capability, to me, it doesn't seem much more than you're just wasting money. How do you guys go about doing that and determining what vendors you should be, doing business with?
I like to start by determining, start with a strategic plan. Everything I do and everything I spend should support something in that strategic plan or the mission and vision statement of the organization. If I'm not supporting that, I'm wasting money. I'm spending money on things I need or I think I need instead of what the organization actually needs. So for me, it's kind of the Franklin Covey big rocks approach. Let's handle the big rocks. Let's handle those things first. That's where your most impact uh, will be had. But have to let the business succeed, and that starts with mission, vision, and the strategic plan, and tie everything to that.
Yeah, I think defending a spend is a challenge. There are three pillars that I suggest. One is showing that you're remaining compliant. Another is showing that your reputation is still intact. And last but not least, showing that the business continuity plan is still in place and that it works. I think those three things, reinforcing those, show that the spend was money well spent.
Yeah, one of the things that I did when I was with IBM was try to figure out how do you justify business continuity and security into a company. I mean, because let's face it, I mean, a lot of executives would look at that and say it's an insurance policy. If nothing bad ever happens, then what value did I get out of it? I go back to what Keith said. It said, hey, look, you kind of didn't have an issue. Well, there's value to that. If you did have a problem, or if there is a problem in another company, let me show you what the impact was to them. And then Rebecca, kind of what you had said earlier, this is what would have happened to you if this had occurred to us. Okay. Now, the other thing I like to do is to clearly give them some of the metrics that say, here's what each one of these things are doing for you. I mean, we were able to prevent this many attempted incursions. We were able to recover more quickly on these systems so that the impact of downtime was much more minimal than it was before. I'm trying to show them that there is value to it. But then I'm also trying to show them back to the continuity statement, which is that, hey, look, you have capability, you have capacity because of continuity to be able to flex, right? You could use that capacity to do certain things. And I've created an architecture here that allows you to grow temporarily, utilizing some of that capacity until you can then permanently get that capacity. So it's a way of showing them that their business continuity, their cybersecurity, their cyber resilience strategy and architecture is not just for preventing bad things, but gives them flexibility. And I think a lot of boards get that, and they like the idea that they could use that technology to do more than just stop bad things from happening, but take advantage of good things.
Thank you, everyone. We have a couple of questions here, so I want to go ahead and get to these questions. One of the challenges is everyone to accept a personal, accountability. And one of the things is always a challenge is getting people to really buy into the security policy itself or its plan itself. I think one of the challenges I always find there is a plan. It's just a plan. A plan's nothing without a true strategy. As we talked here, we have a cybersecurity overall vision strategy. What is your vision? What's your mission? And then we have the tactical operational strategies and roadmaps that come from there. And a lot of companies start with only tactical roadmaps and they never really have the strategic visions. But how do you guys go about getting participation and actually, protecting the enterprise from a security level?
I want to jump in, and I think it goes back to the partnership with the business unit. I mean, security needs buy-in from the very top of an organization. So without that backing from a CEO or others, then you have nothing. But if you build that strategic partnership, if you have them backing you up when you say, this new policy is in place, or we're rolling this out, or this is the direction that we're going, it carries a lot of weight and can help the head of security fulfill the mission of protecting the organization, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I always approach it that security is a people game. There's technology and processes involved there too, but you have to have the buy-in of the people. So I try to over communicate the reason why. I have an advantage where my enterprise is much smaller than many. So I physically see most people in my organization and have the ability to talk to them and have a conversation. So I get questions when I walk down the hall all the time of, hey, this happened. And one of my favorite stories from one of my employees when he emailed me a thank you and felt comfortable enough to email me a thank you because he was getting ready to buy a house, and he almost fell for a phishing scam that he would have sent his down payment to another fraudster and taken that ability for him to buy the house away. And it was a great day. It was a wonderful thing to know that you're effective, but I don't know if he would have approached me if I didn't have that relationship and that establish that communication with the employees to help further that along. So I mean, that it's all about communication to get accountability, help them understand the why of what you're doing.
I love that. Not to jump in on you, Rich, but I just want to double down on that personal touch. I think it goes a long way. And it's just striking me because security training and whatnot, it's not only to protect the organization. These are skills people can translate into their personal lives. You know, it's something they can share with their friends and family to protect their assets, their reputation, their homes, their bank accounts and whatnot. So to get a thank you from your staff, that's incredible that they know that there's the personal touch. And I think that could go a long way.
I have to agree with both Jeff and Keith. You know, you don't get those attaboys too often, so you kind of like you want to take them and really cherish them. Given that I've got a background in consulting, heavy consulting, one of the things I always do when I start with a new organization is to go in and take a look at everything, and then to create, as Jeff said, a roadmap. Here's my roadmap. Here's what I've concluded that needs to be done. I've talked to everybody. I get buy-in from all of the executives that says, look, this is what I'm seeing. This is what the value of my background is. And so therefore, we're going to execute on this roadmap. And I'm going to show you how this roadmap helps you. And it's going to improve upon your ability to prevent bad things from happening. And if you could get the example that Jeff was just talking about, where somebody says, hey, look, I not only took what you told me and I prevented bad things from happening within our company, but I was able to also prevent it from happening in my personal life. It's perfect. I know that, you know, I had a situation where I had a number of employees who fell for a scam and got some of their payroll taken. Okay. And because they weren't listening, and that if you get a phone call from somebody and they ask you for your social security number, a bank account number on the phone, probably not a good thing to give it to them. Okay. We were able to use an example like that to then educate the rest of the organization. So it ended up preventing a lot of people from falling for that same scam. And that's when you do get those attaboys, as Jeff said. They're worth their weight in gold to you, but they're worth their weight because it absolutely justifies what you're trying to do. And then you can use that when you talk to the executives. It's very, very valuable.
And what I would add too is on your cybersecurity strategy plan, really need to get the enterprise risk management board committee, go ahead and have their buy-in with that as well too. You might have an information security compliance committee as well, that they should also go ahead and support that. As you support their policies, they need to support yours too. I think one of the challenges too is as some companies are 100% remote. And so if you're 100% remote, you don't have those belly-to-belly talks that you can have. One way that I've been successful, where companies allow me successful, is even if they don't give me time and maybe the the quarterly or the monthly all hands meetings, but they really should. If they don't, if you can go ahead and you can get with those departments and get some minutes on their meetings, so you can go ahead and see what's on their heart and help them. And as we talked here about finance, one of the things I did on finance to go ahead and look at some of I looked at all the phishing and what was coming into the finance people directly themselves. And then what I did is I brought extra outside experts to go ahead and speak to that as well too. So sometimes you can tailor make that, and that will help them buy actually into your security policy and plan too, as well. That again, the plan is different from the strategic strategy overall, which is different from operational and tactical. We have another question here is talking about, people really want to know what we really think about is happening really well right now in the industry for cybersecurity and what maybe is not helping as well. I think one of the things I'll start out with is I really like what's happening on the AI front. AI is not new. It's been around since 1950. A lot of people get that confused with ML, machine learning, which started around 1960. ML, thinking about memory loss. but really being able to look at those synergies on looking at a lot of the data that we do have, so we can help crunch those numbers quicker, so we can kind of look at those patterns, so then we can use our analysts more wisely along those lines. With that, I would caution everybody to, garbage into a data lake is still going to give you garbage to get through. But what do you think? Why don't you go ahead and start with you, Jeff?
What do I think we're doing well? As an industry, probably the thing that I think it's not really us doing well, but I think companies are doing better at bug bounties. I think that's done a lot to help improve security, to help reward those security researchers for finding issues in platforms. I never would have thought that it'd be possible to make a living off of finding bugs off Microsoft's platform or whatever. But on the opposite side of that, where we're not doing as good is you look at the number of CVEs that we have registered last year versus prior years, and it's jumping tenfold. And our vulnerability management and having to manage and trudge through those vulnerabilities, especially when a lot of scanners and things like that still use heuristic checks and guilt by association of you're running this version of X, therefore you must have this vulnerability, even though it's some obscure situation. It's causing a lot for me and my peers. It's causing a lot of extra documentation, and need to figure out a better way through that. So that's what I think.
I can jump in there. One area I see us doing really well is the area of threat intelligence, especially some of the sponsors of this great event. To me, it is amazing how they can understand the scope of threats and put together cyber defense strategies. It's such a broad field with so many different, cybersecurity affects everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a dentist, if you're a Fortune 500, if you're a mom and pop, whatever. And these threat intelligence companies, it seems like they have it all covered, and they're consistently evolving and staying on top of the different trends, changes, and different tricks that the attackers will come up with. Because it's not the old stuff you need to worry about. Usually, it's the new things.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with both, Jeff and Keith. I mean, the quality of the tools that are coming out now are phenomenal. You see some of the vendors that are participating in this conference have some excellent tools. I think also the fact that you're starting to see tools become more broad. It used to be as a CISO or CIO or CTO, having to uncover and come up with multiple different tools and you having to knit them together. I think a lot of tools now are being knitted together inside the tool, so you're not having to create that interchange between all the different tools. So I think that is getting better. I think also that we're doing, I think as a whole, there's much more awareness. I mean, just think about where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This conversation, most of the people in the company would say, that's your problem. That's a CISO's problem. Now they're starting to understand more and more it affects everyone, and that they're more in touch with the fact that they're members as part of this whole ecosystem of how to protect against cybersecurity.
And since we're talking about vendors, I think one of the things that's helped quite a bit too is the reporting has gotten a lot better. Even in those vendors' tools, I like now that a lot of them will allow you uncouple, ancillary modules that really don't pertain to you, helps you defend that spend. And one of the things is being able to go ahead and, like we said, with the CVEs and stuff like that, it's part of that stuff, even if they go ahead and say it's critical, is it really critical in your environment? And they haven't always been very good in allowing us to annotate that in one place. What's one thing that you guys would think, or maybe two things that you say, especially with the vendors out there and how they can deal with us better? I know for me, I look for vendors who can go ahead and give me a project manager to help me go ahead and do that instantiation well, have really good customer support engineers that can help me instantiation. They have to be part of my team. What do you guys see that you need from the vendors so they can do it better, so they can partner with us?
Thank you, Mel. Go ahead, Jeff. Or Rich.
I was going to say, One thing that I value from vendors is know my industry. When you come to me, please come to me understanding how what you're proposing is going to fit into the industry. It used to drive me absolutely bonkers when I would have somebody come to me and they'd be talking about what they do and talking about a completely different industry. And I'd have to look at them and go, do you understand what we do here? So please make sure that you can explain it in my terms so that I don't have to then interpret what you're saying and explain it to my board and justify it, where if you explain it to me and you've got it structured in a way, I in turn can go ahead and present it more effectively. And I think that is so critical to every CISO.
Yeah, they need to be a true partner. They need to understand the customer's needs, to be responsive, and on top of that, provide excellent support and service. I think those are critical in a good relationship.
Amen.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I have a question. I wanted to come back to cyber liability insurance. One of the things I want to see is if any of us have seen really a change in the application process. I say one, I've done like 3 of these reviews in the last 9 months for companies. I said one of the things is up front is them actually having their own security audit, which is, I would say, if you haven't gone through it, it's almost like similar to me, like a SIG Lite, so the shared assessment light, very similar to that, as well, to go ahead and give them scans of the network, allow them to scan your networks is what I have seen. Wanting to know how your team is built up. Some of them also asking what credentials your team have. That's what I've been seeing as part of the process. I think if you haven't gone through that, it's not one company that you actually engage with. If you look at that, just like you do with your home insurance and stuff like that, there's actually writers, and those writers are then subcontracted through other companies. And so as you go through those writers, those other companies might have other criteria that they need, and maybe have, for example, if you're doing a lot with SaaS, they might come back and ask you for the SaaS platform and then look at audits along those lines. But what have you guys seen if you guys have worked in those areas in that degree?
I've certainly seen the applications be longer than anything else. 4 or 5 years ago, when I was applying for cyber insurance, I think the application was a handful of pages, and then send them your SOC documents and things like that, and they'd come back with a number. I think we're in the 30 or 40 page surveys, and they're relying on third-party scans to help identify what's been associated with you, which in many cases are poorly run or are poorly provided to them, and you have to clean it up. But they are getting much more in depth. I haven't gotten to the point where they ask to scan my internal network and things like that. That might be because I'm in a regulated environment and I have to provide that to my examiners all the time. But not necessarily seeing that, but certainly the applications have gotten longer, the demands have gotten higher.
In healthcare, they've asked quite a bit for at least to see those internal scans, and with the date and time stamps, they can tell that you didn't falsify them.
And also add, the price has changed and it's gone in the wrong direction. But other than that, I haven't, like Jeff said, I haven't quite had them want to do an assessment or like a true scan on my network. But there's an increased interest in incident response and risk management. I think those are the areas where it's definitely changed, and the insurance companies are really focusing.
Yeah, one of the things is they're contracting with outside companies, I won't name any names here, who will actually go ahead and they look at that at least monthly. So they look at reputation, they look to see what's saying in the press. They're actually going ahead and looking at your external servers. Again, that's what hackers can do. It's free information out there. So that's what they're looking at. I think the process itself, the questionnaires are written in a language, generally speaking, where we can understand it very easily. I think that one of the things to go ahead and help you get through that is I would get on the phone very early with whoever your agent's going to be, and make sure that you can go ahead on the other side. What I mean by that is the people who they're going to go ahead and get quotes from. What I've done is I've asked them to get their security engineers on the line, so we can make sure pretty quickly we are speaking the same language. Sometimes it's a translation between what those security engineers or risk management teams who are giving you the quotes from the insurance company directly is, compared to who you're using as your agent. The agent, a lot of times how they translate that, that's where the issue is. I always try to ask for the direct questions from the client themselves, I should say, the person who's going to insure me themselves. Those have been pretty clear, my point of view, or if not, just ask to get them on the phone. So again, where I've gotten clicked has been really the agent who doesn't understand our speak. So need to get direct to the speak is where I've seen. I don't know if you had anything else to add to that, Rich.
Yeah, I've just seen that it's much more comprehensive than it was in the past. When I say comprehensive, they're asking for a lot more. They're looking more broadly. In my instance, what I've seen is that they're now asking for any data that I'm sharing. If I'm sharing my data with another company, how am I ensuring that that company is in fact got a cyber plan and that they are protecting my data? I can never abdicate my responsibility for ensuring the security of that data, even if it goes to another company. And so that's a little different, because now you're saying, well, wait a minute, I've got to do a little bit of research before I even do this to make sure that if they ask me that question, I know the answer to that question.
As we get ready to wrap up here, I'd like everybody to give a couple of key points to like everybody keep in mind. I'll start. One thing is we're in a cyber world at all points in time. They have to be fortunate once, we have to be fortunate at all points in time. I want to go ahead and make sure that any company that you work with, they're truly going to partner with you to make sure that you can be the best CISO that you possibly can. And I would just say, if you have a company that is not giving the time, if stakeholders are not going ahead and working with you, if they're not setting you up for success, go ahead and find out who might be, a key person for you to talk to. You can work up the success. And the one thing I just tell people, if a company's not going to set you up for success, and I do encourage people that if you can't change it internally, then maybe there's another company out there who can totally use your services, and maybe they should do something different. So don't be afraid of that either. Let's start with you, Rich.
No, I agree. Is making sure that you're working with the right people, and that I've always said I call as high up as I possibly can to ensure that I am getting the response I'm looking for, and that in fact those people are addressing the issues that I'm asking for, and that they're working with me on a partner basis. And if not, you need to a relationship.
Yeah, Doc, I think you said it. I mean, who wants to be the fall guy or the fall woman, right? If you're not being respected, if your voice is not being heard, maybe it is time to dust off that resume and begin, interviewing and finding the right fit.
Yeah, and I would say, one of the more important things we need to do is establish those relationships early, understand the business, and understand the risk level. And I think as CISOs, we often, as we're progressing in our career, we understand the technical side, we know the technical side, we come up from a technical field, and we're pushing the ones and zeros across the wire and doing all that stuff, but we forget that there's a business that we're behind, that we're supporting. We forget that there's people and family that rely on that business, and we have to rely on relationships with that, with the leadership, with the board, in order to accomplish our goals. And you'll know through those relationships if you're at the right organization or not, and that you're meeting those goals. So understand the business, understand the risk, educate. Your role is 50% people, 50% technical when you're at this level.
On behalf of FutureCon and Rich, Jeff, and Keith, and myself, Rebecca, we are pleased that you are here with us today. We hope you got some great insights. Any additional questions that you might have, go ahead and get them over to Kim and team, or go ahead and reach out to any of us over on LinkedIn.